So what we're going to talk today about is sales stories. So sales story or sales story. So I define this as a sales story is often a story or a couple of stories that translate your product into value for your customers. And so, like I said, today what we're going to get into is building a framework of kind of what is that base story going to be and what does that entail? And then how do you translate that into your fundraising conversation, into your pitch, into your content, into LinkedIn, those types of things. So obviously we can't cover everything under the sun today, but what I'm hoping to give you is some foundations of things that you can start to do on your own, that you can start to think about. In this presentation also, I have some what I call like take home homeworks. So you can continue to do some of this work on your own and you start to build that kind of framework, or for those of us that have a pitch or a story that we've been using, start to reframe, refine, repolish some of that. And then some activities as well of then how do you translate that into different types of storytelling. So that all being said, there's kind of three buckets that we're going to touch on today. One, the stories themselves. So the kinds of stories you're telling. Two, differentiation. You're going to see that this is a theme kind of throughout this workshop. It's going to be really important, especially in certain types of storytelling, to hit on that. And then lastly, delivery. I think this is something that is often kind of overlooked and yet super important to think about, of like when we're storytelling about our business, it also matters the words that we're using and how we're delivering that information. All right, so the other thing that I want to get into before we hop into the actual framework of this is kind of, we're going to focus on three areas. So I ask that if you're a typer, great, get out whatever your favorite thing to type on, whether it's a Notion, a document, your notes, whatever it is. If you're a journaler or a writer, get out a piece of paper, because we're going to be kind of we're going to be looking at these three different buckets. So one being research, looking and really kind of zooming out at the stories that you could tell or you are telling. Two, auditing. So looking at what already exists, what's there and what you can learn from that. And then lastly, like I said, I'm hoping to give you all some take-home exercises of what are some ideas or prompts that you can move forward with. All right, so why the story matters. This, I always like to take a beat here as well, just because I think this storytelling is an interesting thing of like in the last 5 years or so, it's become a little bit more of a buzzwordy thing that you see on LinkedIn, or you see in different business spaces. And it's one of those things that we all know matters, but we often don't quantify what storytelling can do. And so the reality is that when you have effective stories, it influences your revenue and the decisions being made. So it's, we all kind of know that, but putting some numbers there. All right. Just okay. So the first part of this sales story framework, like zooming out, kind of like I often say some of this isn't necessarily complex, but it's simple and it's impactful. So zooming out for a moment, I want us to think about who you are and your why. So get out that piece of paper. We're going to spend a beat here answering some of these questions. So first, who you are, what your personal connection or story is to what you're building, who your main customer is and what your relationship or connection to them is, and what problems you solve. And then your why, starting to get into some of that differentiation, specifically about your product. If it didn't exist, what would people use? Why is using your product or offering different than what people use right now? And what do you kind of feel is the biggest difference? So this is a take-home exercise. I encourage you to do this on your own time. I think for just 1 minute though, based on what you've written down, I'd like you to just spend a minute highlighting, underlining, or bolding any particular words that stick out to you as you have to repeat your story and tell your story in different ways. Ideally, you're going to start to find like what words, what parts are the things that resonate and you should come back to. All right. The second kind of pillar of this sales story framework that I want to go over is, especially because I know some of us have mentioned AI. I think I even saw in the chat, AI is such a buzzword right now, is something that I call common language versus distance language. So this is when we're talking about how stories are told and the delivery of that story. There is what I call common language, meaning language that you know your audience uses, you know your audience understands. So even one could say like the term B2B is a common language in business. A lot of folks, if we say B2B, we know it means business to business, and that's a term that kind of identifies us in this space, and folks will know. Distance language, on the other hand, is more when we start to slip into jargon. And it can be confusing because, frankly, in the world of tech, the tech world loves jargon and the tech world kind of loves distance language. And so it can be confusing because we can see a lot of buzzwords, jargon words, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to mimic that or use those words. And why? Because it's shown time and time again that when people encounter jargon, they start to either not listen, to bounce off the page, or to kind of disengage. And even worse, depending on who we're selling to, if they encounter jargon and they don't understand it, most people won't say like, hey, you said a term, I don't know what that means. A lot of folks, when you're selling to them, if you're using terms and they don't know what they mean, they just simply won't ask. And then you're creating more distance than necessary. So I put some examples here of, like, for example, with the sales tech tool, once again, like I'm sure if you looked on the market right now, there would be a tool that says we unlock revenue intelligence insights. So it can be a little confusing because it can be like, well, I see that out there. But why I say this as an example of distance language is a lot of this is vague and we don't necessarily know what it means. So unlock, what does that actually, like what verb, what does that do? Revenue intelligence, okay, something around my revenue, but I'm not exactly sure. And same with insights. Okay, so I get insights, but really on what? So you're gonna want to start auditing yourself for the words that you're saying and auditing the content that you produce to understand when it's common language and when it's distance. Can I see your question? How would you say rephrase that distance language example? So on the left hand, like so on the left hand, I'm more like very simple. I'm not saying like post this on your website, but specifically the revenue intelligence one. So I would say like if it's like to give an example, like if it's a tool that revenue intelligence insights, like if it's a tool that helps, like I would want to get more specific on like what does that tool specifically do for that problem. So understand revenue gaps with more ease, or like have visibility into your revenue cycle. Lauren said better understand where your money comes from. Great. Yes. So we're trying to take some of these phrases and just simplify it. The next part of this framework is your position in the market. So this is, I often kind of think of the thing that's interesting about positioning in general, position in the market, is most of the work thus far, like if you were to read different positioning books, is often tailored for very large companies. So this is something that I always like to hit on when I work with founders, because this is something that similarly you want to keep your pulse on as you're moving through different stages of business growth. Um, and specifically, I like to think of position in the market as how you internally are kind of speaking about your product or your business, and then how your customers are speaking about your product and business, and making sure that there's some starting to find kind of alignment across those two. Um, so some more questions here. I think for the sake of time, I'm gonna also leave this for you guys to kind of go through on your own time, but really some questions geared around listening to your customers. Once again, kind of this is back to that differentiate some of these differentiation pieces. So who's in your space? Who might your customers compare you to? What words might they use? And things like that. All right, the next part of this is your customer stories. So I know all of us are a bit at different points of journey. And so some of us may have one customer, some of us may be trying to get customers, some of us may have many. So for those that are very new, I often like to think about dream customers. So if you were able to tell a story about your like what you think your dream customer needs to know. And customer stories, like I said, pair very nicely with your positioning as well. So the key here is as you're starting to think about your different customer stories, um, zooming out and looking at it wide, and also knowing that I think we often kind of assume that the stories we have to tell about customers is the most compelling results, but that's not always necessarily the case. Often there's often other interesting tidbits that you can take in. Right. Okay, so more homework. I've tried to give you guys lots of homework. You can choose to do it or not. But to continue to research, continue to audit. I'm a very big fan also of using audio transcripts and AI to start to pull out some of the words you're using, some of the customer stories you're hearing, and identifying key themes. All right, I want to get into this because I know that a lot of, at least in folks' kind of general introduction, it was okay, I have kind of my pitch or I have some of my story, but what does that mean for different stages of my business? Or what does that mean for specifically my pitch or specifically my fundraising. So like I said, the way that I like to think about it is we're starting to pull in these different pieces. We're starting to pull in the language that we use, our common language, our customer stories, our own stories, our differentiation. We're starting to understand our position in the market and where we are in the ecosystem of things. And that starts to build kind of our pillars of what that means for these different areas. So specifically, I wanted to give some examples here, and I think I'll have us linger here, especially if there is one. I tried to go into pitch, fundraising, messaging, and content. I'd love to just stay for a moment here and give you guys a couple of minutes to journal or jot down, kind of based on thinking about some of these things and thinking about these different kind of pillars in the story, how that might change your pitch, your fundraising, messaging, or your content. Think about each of these categories, and kind of some of some of this framework, why I'm setting up these questions the way that I am. So when I think about translating a story into a pitch, there's a couple of things that is going to be really important. Um, Establishing connection and understanding to your customers. So what stories are going to connect with them? And huge part of sales is what stories are going to drive urgency. So how can you identify the problems and the pain points that they're experiencing and tell that through a story of how you can add value or how you can help solve that? And then with the pitch, and we already kind of spoke on this, the common language, how the words that you're using is really important for the delivery of that. And so that's kind of around the pitch. Specifically for fundraising, as I've mentioned, one thing that at least within the VC community that I've worked with before, the founders I've worked with before, my experience is that differentiation and why you is going to be incredibly important in VCs deciding to invest with you. And then of course, I think this one we're maybe a little less surprised on any results, any directly tied to ROI numbers and stories around that you can tell well fundraising is going to be incredibly important. When we're thinking about as far as what does our story mean for messaging, I think um, this is when it's specifically on how customers, and I know I see someone asked about like what if you don't have existing customers? I would say this is where it's if you don't have existing customers, it's helpful to think about how your competitors are describing and what's different about you specifically. You can also think about what conversations you've had thus far. So for brand new founders that maybe don't have a large customer base, the other things that I'll ask when you're thinking about creating a story is as you're pitching your product to potential customers, what are they saying about it? Oh, this reminds me of XYZ product perhaps, or oh, is this a tool for saving me time? Is this a tool for like the questions that your network, that people you're talking to, even if it's not a potential customer, can help influence um, how you're going to describe yourself? I think a lot of the times, and I say this because it's easy to start describing our business based on what we think, but no matter what stage you're at, you want to check that assumption with potential customers, with the kind of community around you to help shape the story um, in a way that's compelling and understanding and understandable. And messaging, a big part of that is hooks. And so if anybody's interested, I have some like hook worksheets as well. So how do you take some of these, like, okay, if I'm telling a longer story, how do you identify the parts of that that are going to be really compelling and engaging to grab attention? Um, and then the last the last portion of this content is really to me, content is where you can have a lot of fun with storytelling and also with taking all of these different aspects of your framework. So you can take some of why you, and there's a story there that you can create into a blog or a video or LinkedIn content. There you can take the values of your product and why you built it that way. So a lot of these different aspects of your framework, you should think about repurposing for content, uh, and but still putting that kind of in a storytelling lens.
If anybody's interested learning more about like AI agents and some of the opportunities in SaaS. We have that coming up on Monday, December 23rd at 10 a.m. We also have one that I always do. That's one most popular workshop. It's about finding a technical co-founder. Like, how do you go ahead and find them? What do you need to think about? That's on December 26th. And then steps to build a Gen AI MVP coming up. And this one, I'm bringing a VP of finance at I think a Series C company. And she's going to talk about like, how do you set up your valuation, raising capital, your financial modeling? So anything you need to know to raise funding, she's going to talk about that. And this one I'm very excited about. So it's Deepak. He's basically a US in the USPTO, and he's an expert in SEO, and SEO can really help you grow. How do you set up SEO in simple ways? So that's upcoming as well. And then last but not least, I'm bringing in experts, so lawyers, like let's say you need formation or how do you form a company or any legal advice. Typically, a lawyer is like $400 an hour, but this is free legal advice that you can have like a 20 minutes with her to just ask her any questions. So that's upcoming as well. So this is in our workshops. In terms of in-person event, on December 30th, I have a breakfast for New Year's, and we're going to talk about like AI strategy for enterprise. It's in a beautiful Cow Hollow mansion, so come just enjoy breakfast with us. Would love to have you. And then this Saturday, I'm having a kind of founder VC holiday party. It's going to be at a club in SF from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. And we already have like seven. This is only, we have a party full, but we already have like 1,200 guests. And I think I have like over 100 investors already signed up, but this is just for you to come and like enjoy the holidays. So yeah, these are a little bit about our events. Typically, our events, our workshops are paid, but I started having these membership where you can join our private member, you can join our WhatsApp community, you get free access to all our workshops, and depending on the tier, you're gonna get, especially with the VIP access, like at that party, you'll get the VIP access. We have a special room specifically for VIPs. Almost all the investors are gonna be there. And typically it's 99 a month, but like just for today, I'm giving it for 29 a month. And then for the growth access, you get access to all the workshop for free, and it's 19 a month, but I'm giving it away for 570 a month. So I'm gonna send you this offer now. And also this helps support our community. Like this community was made for all of us, and I've been self-funding it for the last year, but it's not sustainable and we grew so much. So this really helps support me and our community, and we're all about like giving back and helping grow each other's startups. So would love to have you either as a growth member or a VIP member.